There is a kind of tired that sleep cannot fix. Zayan knew that kind of tired very well. He had been carrying it for years, not in his bones, but somewhere deeper. It lived in the place where a person keeps the things they stopped hoping for. He was 27 years old, and he had already made peace with a life that was smaller than the one he used to imagine. Before we go further, there is something I want to ask you. Have you ever looked at your own life and felt like no matter how hard you try, the distance between where you are and where you want to be never gets smaller? Drop your answer in the comments below, and if this kind of storytelling speaks to something inside you, please like and subscribe, because there are more stories coming. Now, back to Zayan. This is not a story about luck. It is a story about what happens when a person who has nothing left to lose finally decides to move. He woke up every morning at 5:45. Not because he wanted to. The room he rented had a thin window that faced east, and the light came in whether he invited it or not. The ceiling had a small crack near the corner. He had looked at that crack so many times that he had started to think of it as a companion, something familiar in a life that felt like it was constantly slipping through his hands. He worked at a small printing shop 3 streets away. The owner paid him just enough to cover rent, a few meals, and nothing else. Zayan did not complain, because he had learned long ago that complaining did not change anything. His mother was in the village, 3 hours away by bus. He called her twice a week, and she always asked when he was coming home. He always said soon, and they both knew he was not sure what soon meant anymore. He had dreams once, not the sleeping kind, but the other kind, the kind a young boy carries in his chest before the world teaches him to be more careful. He had wanted to build something of his own, a business, something real, but every time that thought surfaced, something else was quicker. The rent, the loan for his sister's medical bills, the bus ticket he kept putting off. The dreams were still there, somewhere underneath all of it. He just stopped looking for them. That was the life Zayan had settled into. Quiet, routine, heavy in a way that had no name. And then, on a Wednesday that looked like every other Wednesday, everything changed. Not with noise, not with lightning. It changed the way most important things do, quietly, and without any warning at all. He arrived at the shop that morning the same way he always did. He set his bag down, turned on the machine, and waited for the day to begin. He did not know it was going to be the last time he did any of that. He was let go from his job. The words came out of the old man's mouth, like something rehearsed. They landed on Zayan like something that had been waiting to fall for a very long time. The old man said it without looking at him, said the shop was losing money, said he could not afford to keep 2 workers, said he was sorry, but his voice did not sound like sorry. Zayan stood at the counter for a moment after the words landed. He noticed a small smudge of blue ink on his left thumb and stared at it. Maybe because looking at something small and ordinary was the only way to hold himself together when something large was falling apart. He walked home. The streets felt different, louder, more indifferent. He passed a tea stall where men were laughing, a woman hanging laundry, a child chasing a bottle. The world was continuing at full speed, and nobody had received the news that Zayan's life had just come apart. He reached his building and climbed the stairs slowly. Each step felt heavier than the one before it. He could not have explained why, but he stopped at the top and stood there for a moment before opening his door. He sat on the edge of his bed when he got home. The room was very quiet, just the fan above him and the faint sound of someone cooking next door. And he could hear, just barely, the sound of his own breathing, in and out, like his body was reminding him this was not the end. He sat like that for a long time, not thinking clearly, not crying, not planning, just sitting, the way a person sits when the weight of something has not fully arrived yet. He thought about all the things he should do. Call someone, make a plan, figure out what comes next. But none of those things would come. His mind was too full of the weight of what had just happened. The light outside changed from white to orange as evening came in. The fan above him kept turning, slow and steady. The smell of someone else's dinner drifted under the door. He thought about calling his mother. He picked up the phone. He put it back down. He was not ready to say the words out loud yet. Eventually, he reached for a glass of water on the small table beside the bed, and that is when he saw it, a letter sitting there under the glass. He had not noticed it before. The envelope was old, the paper yellowed slightly at the edges. His name was not on it, no address, just one line written in careful handwriting on the front. For whoever needs it most. He opened it slowly. His hands were not shaking, which surprised him. Everything else felt unsteady, but his hands were calm. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. On that paper was a name, a phone number, and 4 sentences. A man named Mr. Ralph had spent 40 years building something, and he had no one left to leave it to. He had decided, before he died, to leave his knowledge, his contacts, and his final opportunity to someone standing exactly where he once stood. Someone with nothing. Someone who had not yet given up, even if they thought they had. Zion read it twice, then a third time. He put it down. He picked it up again. He sat with that letter for the rest of the afternoon. He looked around the room. The same 4 walls, the same crack, the same fan turning above him, and yet something felt different, like the air itself had shifted slightly. He read it one more time before setting it down. Then he just sat there, in the quiet, with the letter in front of him. Part of him wanted to throw it away. Part of him was afraid to let it go. Part of him said it was not real. Part of him said things like this did not happen to people like him. That was the part that had been in charge for a long time, the careful part, the part that had learned to protect itself by expecting nothing. But there was another part, smaller, quieter, the part that had looked at that crack in the ceiling every morning and still, somehow, gotten out of bed. That part was the one that picked up the phone the next morning. He did not sleep well that night. He lay in the dark with the letter on the table beside him. He thought about Mr. Ralph, a man he had never met, who had somehow thought of him. He thought about the words, for whoever needs it most, not the most talented, not the most experienced, just the most in need, and that, Zion knew, was something he understood very well. At some point in the night, he must have slept, because morning came, and he was still there. And the letter was still on the table, waiting. The man who answered was not Mr. Ralph. Mr. Ralph had passed away 11 months ago. The man on the phone was his former assistant, a soft-spoken person named Tariq. Tariq explained that Mr. Ralph had left behind one final project, a commercial property in the city sitting empty for 2 years, and a network of suppliers, investors, and people who trusted Mr. Ralph's name. Whoever came forward could use all of it, but only for 30 days. Zion did not say yes immediately. He almost said no, almost said he had no experience, no money, no idea what to do with any of this. He almost said there had to be someone better, someone more ready. He did not say any of those things. He said he would come the next day, and then he sat in the silence and thought about what he had just agreed to. That night was different from the night before. The fear was still there, but underneath the fear was something else, something small and unfamiliar, like a door that had been closed for a very long time had opened just a crack. The first week was not cinematic. It was not inspiring. It was confusing and exhausting and full of moments where Zion felt completely out of his depth. Tariq walked him through the property, large and dusty and full of potential that Zion could not yet see. 3 suppliers who had worked with Mr. Ralph for decades looked at Zion with polite skepticism. He was young. He was clearly nervous. He did not know the right vocabulary. He wrote everything down in a small notebook and nodded more than he understood. He went home that first evening with his head full and his confidence low. The notebook was already half full of things he did not yet understand. But he opened it again after dinner and read every word he had written. He made mistakes in those first few days, small ones, the kind a person makes when they are learning something they were never taught. But he did not hide from them. He wrote them down and tried not to repeat them. There were moments when he stood in the middle of that property and felt completely out of place. A man with no experience, no background, and no business being in a place like this. But then he would remember the letter, and he would take one more step. Each night he came home with a little more understanding than he had left with. Not a lot, just enough to come back the next morning. That first night he read through everything Tariq had given him. Old files, contracts, notes in Mr. Ralph's own handwriting. The man had started with less than Zion had, much less, and had built slowly through relationships and consistency. One thing in those notes stayed with Zion longer than anything else. Mr. Ralph had written it in the margin of an old contract, just a few words. Never pretend to know more than you do. People can feel the difference. He read that line 4 times. Then he closed the file, turned off the light, and lay in the dark. Something about those words felt like permission. He went back the next day, and the day after. He asked questions he was embarrassed to ask and made phone calls he almost did not make. He reached out to 2 of Mr. Ralph's former business contacts. One did not respond, one agreed to a meeting. The morning of that meeting, he woke up before the alarm. He sat at the edge of his bed and looked at the crack in the ceiling. Then he got up, got dressed, and went. That meeting changed everything, not because of what was said at the end, but because of what happened in the middle of it. The contact was a woman named Mrs. Hina, who ran a distribution company. She was sharp, direct, and she asked Zayn one question the moment he sat down. Why should she take him seriously? He did not give her a rehearsed answer. He told her the truth, that he did not have a track record and was not going to pretend otherwise. But he said he had 30 days and he was going to spend every single one of them trying to make something real. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said she would send him one small order just to see. He fulfilled that order in 4 days. It was not easy. He called in a favor from a supplier, stayed up 2 nights coordinating details he barely understood. But it was done, and it was correct. And Mrs. Hina placed a second order before he could even exhale properly. He stood in the property after that second order came in. The same dusty room, the same buzzing bulb. But it felt different, like the walls had shifted slightly without moving. Days moved fast after that, not smoothly. There were problems every single day, a supplier who backed out, a miscommunication that cost 3 precious days. But Zion kept moving, and moving had started to feel like its own kind of answer. Then came the moment in week 2 that he did not expect. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, without warning. He had been on his feet since 6 in the morning, and something in him simply ran out. He sat down on the floor of the empty property and could not find the energy to stand back up. He sat there for almost an hour, dust around him, one buzzing bulb above him. He thought about his mother, the crack in his ceiling, and the way the old man had not looked at him when he said sorry. He also thought about all the years he had spent being careful, all the mornings he had looked at that crack and told himself that people like him did not get different lives. He sat with that thought for a while, letting it be there without fighting it. Then something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet settling, the way water finds its level. And then he stood up. Not with music playing, not with a speech inside his head, just a quiet decision, made in a quiet room, by a man who was tired of sitting still. He washed his face at the small sink in the corner of the property. The water was cold. He let it run over his hands for a moment. Then he dried his hands on his shirt, picked up his notebook, and went back to work. The rest of that day was harder than the morning had been, but he finished what he had started. And that, he was beginning to understand, was the only thing that actually separated one kind of person from another. Not because something inspired him, not because a feeling came over him and told him everything would be fine. He stood up because sitting there was not going to change anything. He already knew what it felt like to let time pass without moving. He had done that for years. He was done with knowing what that felt like. Week 3 brought something he did not see coming. Word had spread quietly through business circles that someone was using the old Ralph property. Mrs. Hina had mentioned his name, and that name had traveled further than he knew. 2 new contacts reached out within the same week. One was a small retailer looking for a reliable distribution arrangement. One was an investor who had known Mr. Ralph personally and wanted to see what was happening with his legacy. He did not celebrate when things started to move. He noted them. He moved on to the next thing. There was a kind of discipline in that, and he had not expected to find it in himself. Tariq called him toward the end of week 3. He said he had not expected this. He said Mr. Ralph would have been pleased. Zayan met with the investor on a Thursday afternoon. He wore the cleanest clothes he owned and had prepared for 2 full days. He was still nervous when he walked in, his hands not entirely steady when he unfolded his papers. But he knew the material. He had lived inside it for 22 days by then, and he spoke about it the way a person speaks about something they have earned, not borrowed. The investor listened without interrupting. At the end of the meeting, the investor asked one question. He asked Zayan what he would do if the 30 days ended and things were not where he hoped. Zayan did not hesitate. He said he would keep going, not because he was sure it would work, but because stopping had never actually solved anything for him. The investor nodded slowly and agreed to a partnership. It was not a large one, not the kind that changes everything overnight, but the kind that makes the next step possible, the kind that says someone else sees what you are building and believes it has ground to stand on. Walking out of that meeting, Zayan stopped on the street for a moment. People moved past him in both directions, everyone going somewhere. He stood still in the middle of all that movement and felt, for the first time in a very long time, like he was also going somewhere. The 30th day was a Sunday. The city outside was slower than usual, softer, like even the streets were taking a breath. Zayan noticed that on his way to the property and thought it felt right somehow. He walked through the property that morning before anyone else arrived. It was no longer dusty, no longer empty. There were boxes along one wall and 3 signed supplier agreements in the folder Tariq had given him on day 1. There was a small whiteboard near the entrance with real numbers written on it. He ran his hand along the wall of the property as he walked through it. The texture of it was rough under his fingers. He wanted to remember what this felt like before it became something much larger. He stood in the middle of the room for a long time. He looked at the walls, the ceiling, the morning light coming through the far window. He was not thinking about the numbers. He was thinking about the phone calls he almost did not make, the questions he was too embarrassed to ask but asked anyway, the floor he sat on in week 2, and the quiet decision to stand back up without knowing if it would mean anything. He thought about the version of himself who had sat in this room and could not stand up. That version of him felt both very close and very far away at the same time. The distance between those 2 moments was not measured in days. It was measured in decisions. He thought about the letter, for whoever needs it most. He understood now what Mr. Ralph had known, that need, real need, has a way of turning into something else entirely when a person refuses to let it be the last word. He was not a billionaire on that 30th day. That is the truth. What he had built was not wealth yet. It was the architecture of wealth, the bones of something that now had a real shape. But if he stayed with it, the rest would follow. And it did. Slowly at first, and then not slowly at all. The months after that 30th day were full of their own challenges and their own small victories. But something was different now, and Zayan could feel it in the way he moved through each morning. People who knew him said he seemed different. They could not always say how, just that there was something steadier in the way he moved, something that had not been there before. He still looked at the crack in his ceiling sometimes, not with resignation anymore. More like the way a person looks at an old photograph of somewhere they used to live. But that is not the part of this story that matters most. What matters is what happened to a man who had decided, quietly and without drama, that his life had a ceiling, and then discovered, not through luck, but through 30 days of showing up, that he had built that ceiling himself. And if he had built it, he could also be the one to take it down. That is not a small thing. That is everything. He called his mother that evening. She asked when he was coming home. He said soon, but this time soon had a different weight to it. It was not an apology anymore. It was a promise he actually intended to keep. There is something about a person who has carried heaviness for a long time, and then one ordinary day decides to carry something else instead. They do not announce it. They do not even fully understand it at first. They just begin. And the beginning, quiet and uncertain as it always is, turns out to be the only thing that was ever actually required. Not confidence, not certainty, not the feeling of being ready, just the willingness to take one step while everything in you is still unsure. So, if you like this video, please like and subscribe for more videos like this.